Welcome once again to Deep Web 3 Secrets, and we have today the co-founder of PeakD, Jarvie, in the house with us. Jarvie, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing well, thank you.
Fantastic, and let's just kick it right off. Jarvie, you must be some sort of amazing developer to have built all the things that are attributed to your name. Tell us more about your skill set.
My skill set comes from being a photographer. I was a full-time photographer for 13 years, and the story of getting involved with these projects is mainly that I did a lot of social media. I did a lot of interacting with people over the years, a lot of posting on social media. So when I came over at the time to the social media platform, which was known as Steemit at the time, um, uh, that's where things kind of kicked off. But I am not a developer, so it's kind of a funny story of how I got into it. If you cared about that, I could kind of explain it a little bit more too.
Let's dig right in. Yes, I'm always fascinated by the maybe non-technical people that get so involved and are so important to development, but maybe don't get necessarily the recognition. I myself have maybe limited coding skills, but a lot of times I tell people, yeah, I'm a dev. Yeah, to maybe avoid a longer conversation about what I do. But let's just unpack that right away. How did that get started? Did you ever think you would be doing this when you were a youngster?
Well, not, I didn't think about too many things when I was a youngster. Kind of simple. But I was definitely very tech-minded, a very early adopter. I loved computers when I was early on, and when my parents bought a VCR, I would geek out about it for a day to try to figure it out all the buttons, kind of master it. In my photography career, that's kind of was a big thing, is I was always trying to learn how to use it, learn all the buttons, learn all the technology. So technology does come naturally and easily. And so when I was doing photography, I did a lot of like the social media things. When Google Plus became out, I became very large on that platform. I ended up doing photography for a lot of very large YouTubers in Utah, and I just was very connected with social media and technology. And I had a roommate that he ended up doing a documentary about Bitcoin back in 2013, 14. And so I knew about that a little bit. And when some of my Bitcoin did well, I was like, oh, that thing that I totally forgot about, I should learn how to like maybe, I don't know, I guess while I'm doing my photography, I can do some swing trading and learn how to do it, see if I have the aptitude. And I don't really have the aptitude, but I learned how to do it. I learned all about it, but it's just like, it's not my jam. It's not who I am. So, but I did end up stumbling across Steam at that time, that blockchain. And I started to do a lot of photography. I knew how to do photography things. I like social media stuff. And then I interacted with a developer there who liked photography. His username is Asgarth, and he's like, "Well, I'm gonna make my own interface." And I was like, "Wait, oh yeah, because blockchain is decentralized. There's no person, there's no CEO of a company like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or something like that that says you can't have access to this database of information. Like that's illegal. There's no one there. And so, yeah, you could just make an interface if you want. And in fact, they would celebrate you. They would be happy about that because then they would have multiple choices and there would be other features that maybe they could play around with. And that would be great. And so I was like, hey, you should do this and you should do that. And he said, well, why don't you just join me? and then we started working on it, and it's been 6 years, six coming up on, no, 7, just about 7, almost 7 years since then. And in the meantime, if you kind of want the further story, is Splinterlands, or at that time it was called Steam Monsters, came out a few months later in that year in 2018, and I was like, oh, well, this is kind of fun. I was trying to be more and more involved with that whole community, that ecosystem, and I, got a few of the packs, and I did like the buy sell, buy, over the counter stuff with different people, and I said, there should be a marketplace for this, and they don't have a marketplace, but maybe we could do something. And then they developed a few things, and we're like, oh, okay, we can make an interface for this. And so that's when we started Peak Monsters. At the time, Steam Monsters, I guess, or no, that's Steam Monsters. I can't remember what we called it to begin with.
No, there was definitely a Steam Monsters, and I told this tale when we talked about Splinterlands a week ago.
With
My
Yabba.
own Hive account was created through Steam Monsters.
Oh, yes. Okay. That's pretty cool. That's how you kind of got introduced.
Yeah. So when 2 years ago, when I went back to do the account recovery, it pulled up the Steam Monsters stuff, which gave me a bit of a laugh. Before we get lost, or before we not lost, but before we get deep in like some of the development stuff, I don't want to rush past the photography aspect. And the reason I asked this, my own spouse was a television news director and a photographer, and I watch her when she's trying to take get that perfect photograph. Is when you take a photograph, the photographer is creating this idealized view. You're trying to find this perfect frame in this current the perfect vector, right, to convey, I don't know, maybe some sensation, some emotion, but whoever looks at your photograph, you want them to feel something or perceive something out of the norm. So using your photographer's eye, what would you currently frame in Hive? I want you to think about that. If you were setting up a photo and you wanted someone to feel a certain way about Hive or about PeakD, what would your frame be, and what would you point your lens at?
Well, if it's my story that I want to tell, it would have to be some sort of picture that would look, it's kind of like freedom and not being bound, like some sort of broken chains, and like not feeling like I don't know exactly. My type of photography was I guess never the type where I was creating. I was always the documenter. I would see beauty and I would photograph beauty. I would do events and weddings and people, and I would travel, do a lot of travel photography, and I would just recognize when things looked beautiful, and I would photograph at those times. So, as I stumble around on Hive, I'm like, oh, that's beautiful, that's great, this is good, But the things that I think about more philosophically is, it's kind of hard to photograph. You'd have to do it abstractly, I suppose.
Well, I think what I heard there is training the eye to recognize beauty, and then being able to use your medium and your device to convey that beauty to someone else. And so maybe the wider principle is we can condition ourselves, train ourselves to find certain things. And if we're looking
that
for
is a
Go ahead.
Beautiful. That is an awesome quality. I always appreciate that quality to see beauty, to see good. Some people are just trained from, I don't know, a hard lifetime, I suppose, like a lot of very real things that happen in their life that are just really rough things. And so they just always see like the rough, it's like the people on Hive that are seeking out abuse and like people that are trying to scam, like they're in there, maybe they're trying to, protect Hive and protect us. But their eyes are always looking at the negative, and it's almost like their mind is trained to see negativity. And I've kind of been, I guess, to some extent, you call that a Pollyanna, but I'm trained to like see the beauty in different things, and it's tough for me. And there are people in my life that I have to interact with, and I actually think they're wonderful people, but they are trained to see the negative. You could like it could be a beautiful day, and they're like, I'm gonna get a sunburn. It's like, yeah, it's rough sometimes, but I understand why they're that way, I suppose.
Amazing point. And I was just talking about this in a completely unrelated topic about cinema in Latin America and how it's like a whole generation has been trained that art is showing the negative, the worst of the worst, and that's art. And it's like, well, yeah, but there's another side to life. And I kind of want to bridge us back because you guys took what was at one point maybe a weakness, right? And I remember this way back in the day. Steam it isn't Steam. And you guys made, a front end for a site that, people conflated with technology. I don't think we have that same problem on Hive anymore. But talk me through that transition. Did you get pushback? Did people understand the fact, or was it through the creation of PeakD that you think people began to understand more how decentralization works?
Well, back when we created our site, it wasn't necessarily, Steam It was the larger site. And I think that there is also this mentality that people really want a champion to go into battle and like something that succeeds wildly instead of having a lot of smaller projects that are all kind of competing. They want this like champion with a big backing, and the Steam It company had a lot of employees, it had a lot of money. It was like go forward and win and like do really well. So looking back, I understand the concept. I was like, well, we technically have a better website and better user experience, and it's just like so much nicer here than it was on Steam It. But retrospectively, I'm like, I understand why people still wanted to use Steam It, because they wanted something to have a big success in the blockchain. But when it switched in 2020, was that when we had when Hive split away, it forked to away from Steam, and then there was no Steam It, and then we became the largest one at that point, almost by default, because we were one of the first ones, and yeah, so.
Wow.
If that answers your question.
Well, it definitely goes into my question for sure. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And you tied it back to an idea that I had that we need more champions. But exactly that, identifying that maybe as our weakness, it's really great to hear you dig into why maybe decentralized communities struggle with champions. It's incredible to dig into that. So I should just ask, do you feel like a champion, Jarvie?
I don't know. I know that I'm very proud of PeakD, and I can see the flaws in it as much or more than anyone, having worked for years. I look at the site and I'm like, oh, I would change this, I would change that, I would change this. Like there's so many things that we've wanted to do over the years and really good ideas, but it's also a business of like, well, this feature is going to take weeks to do. This one will take days. This one will take hours. This one could just take minutes. Like where do we put our time and energy? And being a small company that is, like we want to stay afloat and keep going, and we have managed that. So, but
Well, I wonder.
like
Yeah.
it's fun to have a really, really good product. Like I love to create. I was a photographer and I loved to create things and see people happy. That's why I did a lot of like portrait and wedding type stuff. Like they were happy, like it's really fun to see them look through the pictures and be so happy with themselves and happy with that moment that they had. And it's really nice to just, I love to create. And today, and I'm sure we'll get into it later on in the conversation at today's age with AI, like I have more tools to create. I love creating things. And so, yeah, I'm happy when I create, and I would love to work more and build more things. Yeah, that's just fun for me.
Okay, so while we're on this kind of theme here, think about the way that you've used Hive in the last 5 years, and maybe the devices that you use it on, because you were just kind of expounding about the things that you would perhaps change with Peak. And so think about the way that you've used it. Have you moved more towards mobile devices and tablets rather than sitting down at a desktop and laptop? And do you thinking about the way that other people use things, do you think there is a need for some sort of PeakD mobile application, and maybe in some way that highlights photography or expedites the use and addition of photographs? Do we need mobile interfaces to bring people towards Hive? Sort of these simplified interfaces to bring people on and then show them the rest of it.
Okay. Let me go down one thread, one idea. We love decentralization. I think if we're listening to this conversation, it's likely because we love decentralization. I mean, the D in the name PeakD is peak decentralization, or piqued your interest, or like to reach the top of a mountain peak to peak it, like it's all three in one. It was meant to be that way. That's why we chose the name, is because it was like three things in one. But decentralization is a beautiful, wonderful idea. However, people are not familiar with it. They give their money to a bank. The bank now is the custodian of that money. And like they've given their money to the bank with the promise that the bank will give it back. Hopefully, most countries, that's pretty, well, not most countries, but at least the United States, they're going to give it back because they're supposed to. But like this, we don't even have to really be a full-on custodian or like owner of our passwords on most places, because if we lose them, they'll just give it back to us. They'll give us a new one, like. So it's tough. Like I love it. I love the decentralization, the true ownership aspect of blockchain itself. However, people aren't used to it. And it's tough because then on the mobile experience of these things, how do you handle their keys? You have to make them install Hive keychain on their mobile, put in passwords, or put in the keys there, and then sign into keychain every time. they want to use it, PeakD, and then go to the PeakD website, like, so it's tough to, like building the mobile app with so much time and effort, then we have to figure out how to do the keys. So the thread that I like to go down and is, to some extent, I wish there was a bit more custodianship. Like if we or some project was like, hey, we're going to help you, like training wheels. We're going to have that experience like you're used to with passwords and all that sort of stuff. But the moment that you get X amount of money in your wallet, like you need to come off the training wheels, like if you've posted this many posts, now your account is kind of valuable and we shouldn't be, you should take ownership of it. But so many people are like, well, I've got an account, there's nothing on it, I made 3 comments, like it's just not worth it enough. Like there's like $1 in the account. This is just not worth it enough to me to care about the keys, the blockchain keys that are involved in all this. Like, just so I think that is something that I wish we could do a little bit better to help, have some training wheels, not like throw them into the deep end and say, you got to swim. This is how we do it. And we're going to, like, we can't do anything but make you really believe how we believe, like you just got to do all the key stuff. That's just how it has to be. Because if we did anything else, everyone would get mad at us for not being fully decentralized. Like I love the decentralized aspect of this stuff, but there needs to be some training wheels. Some helps to help people.
Beautiful discussion there, because I think that's exactly right. And some people that, some people with $20 will begin to feel that this is really important to them, and some people it might be $500 before they can care. It's an individual by individual basis, which kind of harps on decentralization again. Almost, I'd love to do a whole new podcast on that, because I want to transition to Peak Monsters, and here's how I'm going to do it. You have talked beautifully about developing in a decentralized world and how beautiful it is to do little things and big things and make priorities. And then one day you wake up and you realize you're a volunteer. And how are you? Shouldn't a business make money? And then maybe even some people tell you that it's your job to make money because I want to use your app, so you figure it out. So I wonder how much of the transition over to Peak Monsters was because you guys loved Splinterlands, and how much was just an open invitation from Splinterlands to create interfaces where they gave you the space to earn some income from it.
So originally, back in 2018, I believed in the statement by the founder, Jarvie and PeakD, that he was very interested in other companies building on their platform and would facilitate it and would create, he eventually created a back-end system to do market transactions and was serious about it. And all these years later, they've kept their word and have facilitated third parties to do things. Now, of course, they ended up doing a lot of the features that we had at that time themselves, which makes sense. I understand why they do it, because a lot of users wouldn't have those. They don't know that we exist, so they didn't, they need those features as well. So I thought that was awesome. And now I forget a little bit, like I was just going down that celebration, memories, and I forget exactly what your question was.
Yeah, no, good start. And so I'll just reframe it. When you made that step, it was and great that you mentioned Jarvie and PeakD. I'll just mention on our Deep Web 3 Secrets channel, you could check out our interview recently with Jarvie and PeakD. Amazing guy. And he offered that invitation, and Peak Monsters was created as
Okay.
kind of the first company
Sure.
that did it. How much of that was based on the need for a revenue stream, and how much was based on still the joy of open source?
It was the joy of creating. Oh, we can do that? Let's do it. I think that's a lot of how me and my business partner work. It's like, oh, we can do that, and people want that. Like, oh, that will make these people happy. This is what people will want. Let's do this. Like there's so many times I'll wake up because he lives in Italy, so he's been working overnight while I'm asleep. Usually I'll wake up, someone has asked a question at like 1 a.m, and before, like for a request for a feature, and before I even wake up, it's already done. Like it's already online. He's like, oh, that was easy. I just created it for you. Like that's just the mentality of that he has. It's like, oh, they want that, let's make that. And I think that's when we created Peak Monsters, and it's been a long time. I don't have perfect memory. It was like, oh, there's this new thing and they have a need. And can we do that? And I thought maybe we're too busy with our Peak project for this blogging stuff. Maybe he won't have time for it, but I've got some of these cards and it would benefit me. And I wonder if he will do it. And there's a need for it. Let me just ask him. He's like, sure, let's do it. I don't know why he did it. It's kind of crazy, but like, I'm glad that he did it. We're both, like it's been beneficial. There's been years where it was, we're kind of like, man, this is a lot of work. Why did we do this again? And then there's been some years we're like, oh, this is awesome that it exists. All that hard work that we put in years ago is kind of paying off now, and great that it has a financial benefit. But I would say that the focus on all these things where I love to create. I don't know where his passion he is good at creating, I'll say that. I'd have to let him speak for himself if he has that same sort of love of creating.
Jarvie, perhaps a more a more narrow question. PeakD has now incorporated kind of some features that allow you to use features from other front ends. And no offense to the InLeo team, but I use InLeo more on PeakD than I do on InLeo, because there's now the short form with the snaps, and you can access waves from Ecency, and you can access threads. How involved with developing out snaps were you?
Well, I'm involved in any of the features that are on PeakD, Peak Monsters, or Peak Open. I'm involved some way. I'm not the developer of them. And there are times when people ask for certain things and they get created. And there's times when Asgarth, my business partner, he just is like, all right, it's time to do that. And I'm like, oh man, I've kind of wanted that for years. And I just thought it was going to be too big of a project. And now all of a sudden you're interested and excited, and it's going to happen, and like a week or two later, here it is. It's done. Like that was crazy timing, but it was all his kind of like baby, even though it's something I've thought about for years. I just thought, I don't know how Hive will enjoy it, but there were other people. I would say that with Leo team and Ecency team, they kind of paved the way for it to be acceptable and interested by the Hive audience, and got that kind of initial feedback. Like it wasn't like a terribly difficult feature to create. We could have done it years ago in a week's time, but like we didn't know if that was something that the community wants. And as I said earlier, we kind of do where people are we love making things that people are excited about.
Can you recall if there was any conceptual resistance to kind of expanding short form content?
There was another project. What was it? I can't remember. That was doing short form, long before the other three of us. And it just seemed like people resisted it. It just seemed like it didn't go well. And now they were doing slightly different technically different type thing. They were doing posts as opposed to comments on a container post. That's technically speaking how it kind of worked. And maybe that was the resistance to it, or just something. I don't know exactly what I was going there, but it just seemed like, oh, they're getting a lot of resistance. People aren't using them. No one, like, I guess Hive doesn't want this. And then I don't know which of the other two was first, Asensi or Leo, or I guess second. But when they did it, it seemed like there was a lot of like positive. Okay, cool. People want this now. So
I love
let's get it on there.
because you're exactly right. It was a conceptual shift at a protocol level, seems very minor, right? Well, I mean, a post and a comment are the same thing. Just it's a post is an orphan; it doesn't have a parent, but it changed everything. So it is a very interesting thing. I want to ask this question.
Posts go onto the news feed. Posts go onto the news feed, and then you're just filled with it. When you go to your feed, you're filled with all these things, and you're like, I don't want to see all this, and that's annoying. And there's also a bunch of auto voting with the Hive reward pool. Like anytime someone does a post, there's some auto votes that go out to it, and they're like, no, don't auto vote this little statement that I just had pizza for lunch. No, I don't want $20 for that. People are going to be mad at me. And so there's just technological things that have, foundational things that have been built over the years that just made it problematic, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Eco,
the history. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ed.
I was going to say, Eco, if we don't pivot into Splinterlands things, there's probably going to be a rebellion in the audience.
You're so
along those lines. And let me ask one question, because I don't want to boomer up Splinterlands, but how heavily have you yourself gone into lands in advance of some of these feature rollouts?
So I am probably one of the top 3 or 4 land. I wouldn't say land owners. There's people that have more land than me, but I have filled my land. That I'm working the land more than most people, like top 5. Like a lot of people may have 2,000, 3,000 plots, but I have 1,300 filled. So I'm very involved in that, and with Splinterlands rolling out an update to land, I spent pretty much the entire day working in that and developing new features, or like using it a bunch, figuring out how to make life easier for people like me, and then requesting the changes to be developed. And yeah, so was that kind of your question, like regarding the land stuff, or just how it looks like when we work on new features?
So you're pretty heavily invested then, and have you
Yes.
on your in Pretoria, have you retained the right of prima noctis? Don't answer that. That's a horrible question.
Oh, that's funny. I want to jump in here, Ed, because this kind of touches on something Jarvie mentioned earlier. Jarvie, you are the first developer I have ever seen that goes into the land chat in Splinterlands and says, hey, everybody, I've fed my AI all the questions and comments from this channel, and I think it says that you guys want these features. Would this be useful to you? How did you start on that? I've never seen anyone do it before or since, but I imagine more and more people are going to be picking up on this because it seems you've used it to great effect.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I should mention. I wouldn't call me a developer, so I have been using AI to learn, and I have learned tons about development. I've built applications. They're kind of for private use right now, and share them with my friends and all that stuff. So I've been doing a lot of development, but like I think early on at the beginning of the show you called me developer as well, but that's not true. I did not develop PeakD or Peak Monsters, but I am kind of like project manager of sorts. But thank you. And yes, the other theme is I am I guess somewhat obsessed with AI. I learn it. I spend hours a day learning more about it, and I spend hours more of a day using it and getting better and even like teaching people how to use it. So my mind is almost programmed that when I'm like, I am behind on this land stuff. I got to figure out what's going on. I'll go in and copy 7 days worth of conversations from a Discord channel. And I'm like, this would be hard. And also there's a lot of things I may not quite understand reading through it all. So I put it into an AI language model and asked a few questions, trying to catch up what's going on, and that's kind of how I would do that. And then my mind would be programmed to think like, ooh, how would I create a new app that would do this for me to keep me up to date on what's going on? Like on ChatGPT, they've got the tasks feature that you can use, and I have it telling me each day it will give me a report and check all the news and see what's going on with AI and what's going on with the prices of certain crypto tokens. And it will also give me, other like religious like thoughts of the day, and it will teach me how to code each day. And now I'm thinking, now I need an app that will kind of recap everything that's going on the Splinterlands, all of the Discord. But that's another app for another day. So
I have
yes,
to ask. Have you ever?
a funny.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say a funny side note about like the conversations of yesterday, just to show off my developer who is amazing at communication, who is great at interacting with users. And I think that's a huge thing because there's so few developers that have those sorts of like great interaction skills, communication, like you can really understand what people are saying. Is I asked, hey, are there any features that we need to do because of these changes? And then I got people like asking for features that had nothing to do with the changes. I was like, yeah, but like, what are the ones based off of the new changes? These are just ones that you've wanted for months now. And you're just like, I was like, yeah, and I could think of some of the issues with creating one. And he came back to me, he's like, hey, make sure you let them know, like, we're willing to do any of these things, but we just need to know that there's actually going to be more than one person needing that thing. Like, how many people are out there, like wanting this thing? And I was like, okay, let me go back in there and make sure people understand that concept. Like, I may be telling you some of the issues with creating this and some of the reasons why we're not just jumping into it right away, but if there's plenty of you that want this, we'll do it. We just have to know.
That is a brilliant transition for me, because the fact is, what I've learned in the last 7 years is that people don't know what they want. And so one of the issues with people would like this is you might end up building something that it turns out nobody wants. Has that ever happened to you guys?
More than you would. No, and it's not just that they may not want it. It's that we're spending most of our times creating and perhaps not enough times telling people that things exist. There's so many times when someone's like, hey, we would like this and that, like they just like, oh, I have a great new idea. You should do this or that. And we're like, yeah, we did that like 2 years ago. It's over here. Let me give you a link. They're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that even exists. Like, it's pretty funny, and it's understandable. And that really actually brings me down memory road, what you were saying, because now that it really is that when we were playing those photography games on Steam a long time ago, and I came across this developer, why did he create a new interface? Because he wanted some things that the other interfaces did not have. And why did I start working with them? Because I wanted an experience and some features that the other interface did not have. And then we both started working on this, and we're like, what do we want? Like, we are very typical users, like we post photography, we're like to post a bunch of things, and well, we were basically creating the site that we wanted. And how did Peak Monsters kind of end up being the way it is? Because I pushed them to create the site that I wanted, like a site that would save me time and help give me information to make the right decisions was our key foundational things. I think it's still on the website somewhere. Like, it was all about saving time and getting the right information to make the right decisions. Now, some things have been challenging, and there's some things I wish was more time saving, but like that was kind of our ethos, like create the themes that we wanted. But then, hopefully there's some other people that have some great ideas, and a lot of things have come from other people.
Absolutely. And I'll just say, you guys have saved me a lot of time in more than one way. And that kind of, maybe we could bridge this into, oh, we did have one more question from Solo Miner. I should ask it. When Splinterland's team made the decision to start burning DEC, they kind of were eating into your revenue, I guess, a little bit. How do things like that, as somebody who builds open source, connected, decentralized, how does it change the thought process when you're not really in control of the dependencies, so to speak?
Okay. So it is like there is some worry, but we've always just kind of blindly trusted that original statement by Matt that they were very interested in there being third parties. And then there are times when they're like, well, we're going to create that feature on our site, and now people start using it, and but it does seem obvious. Like, I know that if we are facilitated and allowed to exist, then so are so many other projects, and they just get to do their things, and they can do it really well. And it's not a sure thing that we're always going to be at the top and doing really well. So I don't know. Like, I guess it can be scary, but I don't know. I don't know how to answer that perfectly.
Well, actually. But it keeps you on your toes. I almost think you kind of did, because you can't get stagnant in such an ecosystem, right? You have to stay on your toes.
Yeah, there is no like deal that you make, like, let's work together on this, and now we have a partnership, and the partnership means that other people that my partner is not going to allow other competitors to come in and ruin my stance. There is no like partnership in that sort of way between Peak Monsters and Splinterlands, or even between the Hive community and PeakD. Like, there's no partnership like that. They're not going to protect us from competitors.
Wow. And
so
now, speaking of this, I want to talk about Peak Open and the decision to move into more decentralized tools. Was this just the fact that you already had PeakD or Peaked, and because my interest has been piqued, and you already had Peak Monsters, and you just said, these other tools, it would make more sense to be able to, or how was that decision? I mean, how did you come to the place where you said, here on out, the new stuff, we're going to try to open it up as widely as possible?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the show, you also had a statement as to, like, a lot of open source things, and you mentioned PeakD, which isn't open source. But, it was a couple of years ago that we were like, I wish we had a few of these other tools, but we do love the concept of open source, and we do want there to be more. And if we were to create this new tool, we don't actually want to be the only ones that have this tool, because there's a lot of our users, followers, there's a lot of the people that they connect with that use other platforms. And so then how will they interact with them? Like if you were to create a chat system and it was only on PeakD, you would think, some business mentalities are like, great, now we have a monopoly on chat. It's like, yeah, but our users interact with Sensi or Leo users. Like we want them to interact with each other. That would be the great thing to do. So let's create an open source chat and hope that all of them use it. And then we said, okay, well, we really want polls, but just having polls on PeakD, on Peaked, well, then not all of the Hive audience or the Splinterlands audience will be able to vote because they use other things. And the value is in how many votes, like we want the votes to be good. So let's create an open source tool so that they all can use it. And Sensi ended up using it, so their users and our users both use it and it ends up being the same. They could both vote on the same poll. And we're like, okay, and hopefully other UIs, hopefully Splinterlands uses polls, and hopefully these other websites integrate it, make it in a way that would be simple. And there are other places that are like, no, we've got to have like the polls that only work for us here. And that way we can distinguish ourselves as we're the only ones that have that. And we don't go by that philosophy. We're like, let's create a bunch of tools and not just have them. There's so many times in open source, it's like, it's open source, it's on the repository, and I hope no one sees it because we want to be the ones using it, but we're like, no, use this. Please use this. Yes, PeakD has polls. We don't want to be the only ones using it. We want everyone to use it because then it becomes better. And then we wanted more stats for the Hive blockchain. So we created that as an open source thing, and then we can integrate it into PeakD, And then we created stats for badges, and then we created stats for communities. And so that you can, integrate those. And do they get like super integrated in lots of different places? Not as much as we hoped. It's we wish that more sites would just use these projects. Like that would make us really happy if they use these things. And we created an open source for the Hive market, the Hive dollar pairing, like a nice interface for that. Yeah, like we want people and then we can link to it on PeakD, and our users can use it. Like, so the features that we wanted on PeakD or other places, we are like, we can make these as open source tools to use for PeakD and hope that a lot of other sites use it as well. I guess that was kind of the ethos behind Peak Open. And we knew that there was a lot of other developers, and we could just kind of like be program managers of these projects and have the developers do it and get money from the Hive Development Fund and pay these developers to work on the projects, the stats, the stats and the chat and the polls, and there's been so many things that the Peak Open project has done, and we put a lot of them on Hive Hub just to show them off. But behind the scenes, we hope that people take them and put them onto their own UIs. That's not just like, oh, I hope I don't offend the Peak Open guys by using all this stuff they did. Like, that's really, really what we want for you guys to do. The Explorer, the all the different things. Like, these things were paid by the Hive community, and like use them. The sad thing about open source is like it's meant to be a place where other people can contribute and add to the code and stuff like that. And I just don't see that. It's people don't do it that much.
Jarvie, kind of taking the 1,000-foot view, it essentially sounds like what you're making this distinction here is front ends developing things to differentiate themselves, maybe making those things available to other users on Hive. But I think the distinction you're making is productive or non-destructive competition between different teams and different builders on Hive versus a sort of a zero-sum game. And it seems like people are more positive about these things when they see new users and new energy coming into Hive. So along with that thought, with the idea of fostering non-destructive competition between the different teams on Hive, what should we be doing more of, or what tools are we not using to help onboard new productive users to Hive? How would you change the face of onboarding and attracting new users to Hive?
Well, I think I pointed out a big one. I think I don't know that my developer partner feels exactly the same. And I think that it just we look for other people to state what they think as well, to kind of confirm our thoughts on it. But that whole concept of helping people with a little bit of custodianship, having a cutoff point saying, look, we're no longer going to be custodian of your keys because you've got X amount of posts or you've got X amount of money. You really need to be weaned off this and take care of things yourself now. And now you have a reason to do it because now you've got all these posts and you've got all this money. Now you like this, that's a little push in that direction. I think if we could do some sort of custodianship thing, I think it would help. But am I right? Am I wrong? Obviously, we haven't done it yet because we haven't seen a huge push. And if there is, I'm literally the way that it works is if you were to see a bunch in our Discord channel of people all kind of pushing in a direction, whether it's this feature or like a Patreon-esque sort of feature, like encryption plus monthly payments, that sort of thing, like a paywall, like a lot of news type things have. Like if that's where people were interested, okay, that's kind of where it would go. Because I know that these things would be cool, but how much are they going to be used? We've spent so much time creating lots of random features that okay, well, that one didn't get used quite as much. Are we still happy it's there? Yeah. Are we happy that we spent all the time on that thing instead of this thing? Maybe not,
Wow, I just wanna maybe try to get a few other topics in the first hour. Audience members, stick around for the after show. We'll have a more open question and answer period. But I recently claimed $150 bounty on the OpenGenie wish list. So just take a second. It's my impression that OpenGenie is not as well known as it should be. How long has it been around, and how can I help you?
Know that it exists.
Yeah. I mean, talk me through it. How can we tell more people about it?
Well, we definitely need people that actually have bounties that they want to be created. Maybe back when we created it and we're thinking about it, there could have been bounties for logo design and artistic creations, and then AI came around, and you're like, oh, well, I can kind of do that easily myself now. So those types of bounties are gone. And coding bounties, stuff like that. I want this app to exist, and you put it onto OpenGenie, or I want just any sort of thing that you want created, you create it on there. And it is a bounty system, but we use kind of the terminology of you have a wish, someone that has a wish, and then you have a genie that comes in and fulfills that wish. It was a clever sort of wording, but it is a bounty system. And I will answer it this way, like they're probably, I mean, it's someone had a way of making this really popular and useful, like go for it. We're not trying, we really aren't trying to make money on OpenGenie. We created it. There's no fees. Like our team doesn't take any fees. The Hive community paid in a sense for this development. Like it's free. Now, if someone kind of wants to run with the idea or champion it a little bit more, like let's chat.
Amazing. I am the champion, my friend. Okay, so this is fantastic, and we have a couple of follow-up questions, and we'll probably get to them in the after show. But just to kind of finish out this show, all of the people that have these minor suggestions, quality of life, feature requests, where can they go to let you know that they want whatever it is that they want?
Don't let me know. I'm not that important. I've got 100 ideas and I share them. I request them all the time from the developer. They all just sound like they're coming from me. So if you tell me the idea and I go share it, like it just sounds like it's coming from me. And I've given so many over the years. Letting me know isn't that helpful. Going into our Discord, stating it there, getting some of your friends to also like are they on board as well, or is it just you trying to champion the cause? Going into Discord, letting them know, like the developer, the people doing the work need to know that their time is going to be worth it, and it's just not another request from Jarvie. Like he wants us to do this other thing now, but yeah.
I love that.
Asking us, and then also stating like that it's not just going to be you using it, like are we creating a feature for one individual? Are there other people that think like you, that want what you want too? No.
Eco, I've got one final big question before we release Jarvie to be pampered with a bunch of technical questions. And Jarvie, this is more philosophical. So thinking about Hive, thinking about PeakD, thinking about just the technology here and the way we use it. If we get it all right, Hive and PeakD is going to last far into the future, and it may outlast us. So some impression of us is going to be communicated to some future peoples. Pardon me. And so let me give you something from Aristotle, and I want you to think about this. This comes from Poetics. And Aristotle said, it follows that we must represent men either as better than in real life, or worse, or as they are. It is the same in painting. Since you're a photographer, in your mind, you can replace that word painting with photography. And Aristotle said, Polygnotus depicted men as nobler than they are, Paulson as less noble, and Dionysius drew them true to life. What image, what legacy of yourself, or what impression of yourself would you like to be projected out into the future on whatever Hive becomes 20, 30, 40 years from now? What would you like people to see about Jarvie?
I don't think in those terms of way, but I do have thoughts on the subject. Um, and it relates a little bit to the AI discussion. It relates to that if we look at Hive in these last bunch of years, it was just kind of like setting up foundations. And maybe we could say years from now, like Jarvie and Asgarth worked to create these tools when it wasn't easy. You had to do it all by hand, and each one of these features took weeks to do, and they were they weren't getting as much feedback from the community, and sometimes the community doesn't know what they don't know, right? Like, and they did it all, it was hard, and foundationally it was difficult. But now with all these AI tools, like, I could definitely see Hive, the blockchain, and some of these core tools as being this amazing place to develop all these new apps and programs that are going to be facilitated more and more because of AI development. Like, let's create all these AI things, but then where do we let it live? And where does the things get stored? And how does it live on into the future? Like, oh, let's build it on to Hive. And, like, how do I write all these posts and content and hope that it exists if Facebook dies or, like, or, something were to happen to some of these places or becomes totalitarian in their nature? Well, let's build it onto Hive. I see that being awesome. So everything that we have may be far surpassed by the things to come. But I guess we could just be that footnote going, it's amazing that they did it when it was way more difficult and things took so much longer. And it's nice to be a part of it, to think like if we weren't there, it wouldn't have kept going to be that thing that everyone wanted to use. We may not be there, that moment for us may not happen for a year or 2 or 5. And there's a chance it may never happen at all, that we become this place that everything starts to get built on, because of these great foundations. But I think there's definitely a chance that it does happen. And it's fun to know that we kept it going until it got there. So.
Amazing conclusion, and we will keep going, but you won't be here because this has been Deep Web 3 Secrets. Good night.